Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome you today to an interview with Dr. Helen Nissenbaum. Helen is one of the world's most influential philosophers whose groundbreaking work in contextual integrity has defined what privacy means to society, laying the foundation for privacy work we do today and directly influencing our technical definitions, such as those of differential privacy. And her work in contextual integrity continues to inform the US government on how it should be thinking about privacy. She is a professor of information science at Cornell Tech, a contributor behind numerous privacy tools you may have heard of, such as Track Me Not and Ad Nauseam being the most well-known. And I must say, she is personally one of my personal heroes, and it's a great honor to interview her today. Welcome, Helen.
Wow, thank you very much, Andrew, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, so in our conversation today, I was hoping we could cover kind of two main topics. First, kind of your work in contextual integrity, and then second, in obfuscation, some of your more recent contributions. And my hope is that we can give sort of a wide variety of audience listening. So we have everyone from kind of technical folks to entrepreneurs, VCs, philanthropies, this kind of stuff. And we want to give this sort of broad audience a general view on both sort of the long-term goals of privacy, which I think sort of well defined by contextual integrity, as well as sort of what we should work on next, and what's sort of the most immediate impactful steps that each of these actors can take towards the long-term goal. And I think that the most unique and valuable part of this conversation can be taking sort of either the long-term goals or the next steps, and then trying to frame it specifically for an entrepreneur or a VC or a philanthropist or a hacker or a student or whatever. So that'll be kind of the theme. So to kick it off, let's start at the beginning. So why contextual integrity, and how does it inform what our long-term privacy goals should be?
Yeah, well, I was very interested in the digital technologies, and I'd entered the field by thinking about computer ethics. So I was never coming from this top-down approach where you say, oh, privacy, it's such an interesting concept. What is its definition? It was always to look from the ground and from the ground and go upward to that concept. And what was stimulating to me was looking at all these different technologies, and the way I organize them in my thinking and reflecting in the book Privacy in Context is to say, well, these technologies are amazing at monitoring and tracking, or placing people under surveillance. They're outstanding at capturing the data, holding onto the data, and analyzing it, and so on, everything that we now think of under the heading of big data. And then, of course, it provides us these social platforms and communications media that are just unprecedented. And so I was interested in, excuse me, when people complain and they are concerned and their anxieties about privacy being violated, what are they talking about? I was more interested in capturing that. So that's how I came to this wanting to think about contextual, well, it wasn't called contextual integrity at the time, but wanting to understand what's at the root of the concerns. And I didn't think that when I looked around at what was out there on privacy, it didn't feel to me that what other people were saying was capturing what it was that was stirring people and stirring people's anxieties. So that was the root of thinking about contextual integrity.
Wow, so the root is actually as a reflection of maybe what society was already detecting themselves, sort of in aggregate, and you were trying to kind of codify that into sort of more of a pure definition than necessarily like a top-down hierarchical concept.
Yes, and as someone who observes how important it is for information to flow for all sorts of social benefit, I didn't see that there was a future for a concept of privacy that was all about actually secrecy. It didn't feel that if you were going to promote privacy, as many people do, and sometimes computer scientists do, as we're not going to let any information out, that's what privacy is. Or like it means people have full control over information about themselves. If that's privacy, I can't defend it. It needs to be something about the way information flows in society that you feel carries moral weight. And so we needed to find some understanding of privacy that was clear enough definition, but at the same time could be a concept that we could, stick the stake in the ground and say, this is important, this deserves being defended and protected.
Excellent. So, wow, well, that's actually quite a humble way to approach research as well. Sort of focusing on global societal need, but also on what everyone else seems to already be sensing, as opposed to just saying, oh, what's in my brain, and like what's the next great thing that I can come up with. I love that. So actually, so as a reflection of that, maybe for some of our more beginner level audience members, you're in this place, you're sort of noticing that you feel like the definition of privacy is lacking. This doesn't really match what society is, what their emotions are kind of piqued by, and secondarily, the definition that we had was more about security, and hiding information was not something we can defend because of all the costs, the other risks that come with just hiding information straight up. So you're in this place. What is, again, for kind of maybe the newer folks in our audience, what is the definition that you put forward that you felt was the reflection of what people are looking for?
Yeah, so let me actually, one of the most important use cases that got me to thinking along the lines of contextual integrity was Google Maps Street View. So when people started complaining about Google Maps Street View, there were those cases of, there was some people sunbathing without very much clothing on, and the camera captured them, or some people said, they captured someone walking into a bar, just those cases. And the answer was, this is not an invasion of privacy, because, someone could be walking past you in the street while you're sunbathing, and we could see you if you're walking into the bar. So this is just capturing it on camera. This is a public place. You've got no claim to privacy. Nothing going on here. And it felt to me that there's an incompatibility. People are very upset. And here's this argument that says, well, if you're in public, you have no claim to privacy. And actually, my first entry point into contextual integrity was an article that I wrote, which was, do we have privacy in public? And arguing that we do have, and that actually there's a significant difference between someone walking by you and someone taking a video and posting it on the web. So what is that difference? Can we capture in a rigorous way what that difference is? And that was really the first entryway into contextual integrity. So the first line of that definition is to say privacy is about appropriate flow of information, accepting that some flows of information are good and they're acceptable and they're not violating anything. But what is it that characterizes appropriate flow and what characterizes inappropriate flow? So that was like the first step inward. I then, shortly after that, started thinking that it makes sense to think about society in terms of different social domains, because I could see that in different domains, you have different kinds of norms of information flows. And these information flow norms, the rules that hold in different domains, are important because not only for protecting individuals, but also because they're productive for those domains. So in healthcare, and you could go back to the Hippocratic Oath, which is thousands of years ago, we say that the physician will not talk about anything in the household or anything about the ill patient. And when you think about how productive that is, it's productive because that then allows people who are sick to tell as much as they need to the physician in order to do their job properly. So,
wow. Yeah. So what you're saying is that sort of the motivation there is not just the sort of first order protection of patients, but it's actually to facilitate information flow that does protect patients, but as a function of that actually leads to far better medical care because it changes how the patients are going to react. That is still such an important narrative, to the extent that when I go around watching the movies coming out on privacy lately and all these kinds of things, I mostly hear people talking about kind of exclusively the negative story of like all the things we want to prevent with privacy, and a lot of all the things that we could create if it was solved and if we actually had the right information flow seems to fall by the wayside.
Well, Benjamin Franklin, when he was Postmaster General, whatever position he held, was very clear that the Postal Service had to have very strong rules that protected the confidentiality. So it's a federal crime for anyone in the Postal Service to open a letter. And you might think, we're protecting the confidentiality of the communication. Actually, the story behind that is to say, if people aren't confident that the mail is going to be confidential, they're not going to use the Postal Service. And so you have this whole system set up fail because people aren't going to use it because they don't trust it. So the appropriate flow of information plays this dual role in this regard. It protects the individual. And then I like the word integrity, because what we're saying is it protects the integrity of this, in this case, Postal Service or certain kinds of social systems or institutions.
So, okay, that is a really interesting transition to the next question I want to ask you, which is, basically how is contextual integrity to be implemented, in the sense that, like, when I first hear about it, and I read kind of your bio, and I know where you spend a lot of your time, this could be, just regulation should just make all the flows happen that should happen and should be done, or we build an encryption tool that just encrypts it all. It's end-to-end encrypted, and no one has a choice, and it just happens, right? But it almost sounds like these examples that you're giving me have to do with a broader incentive structure, right? Where it's sort of like, and that to me activates entrepreneurs and VCs and philanthropists and like a wider community to be able to do things proactively because they want to outcompete previous things. So anyway, that's where my mind goes. But I guess maybe still the broader question is, like, how do you see contextual integrity like coming into society, and what are people's roles? Like, how should they play a part? Is it just sort of regulators who are going to kind of set aside and say, like, well, it's their job, our job to vote in people who care about contextual integrity, or are there other roles that wider audience can take in as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I wanted to get there and I wasn't sure how we were going to get there. So we're thinking about, in very abstract terms, about the flows of information within, and I don't want to have any kind of spatial image. I want us really to think about these domains in terms of ontologies of people acting in certain roles or acting in certain capacities, and ontologies of information types, and so on. So if we want to try to understand whether a given information flow is appropriate or not, how do we even describe that information flow with enough information about that flow that we can start thinking about it? So the suggestion that I made early on, and I think it holds modulo, one thing, is that you need to be able to describe the flow in terms of who the sender of the information is, who the recipient of the information is. When I say who, I don't mean, oh, Andrew, Helen. I mean acting in certain capacities. So it could be physician, patient, and so forth. So who the sender, who the recipient, and then the data subject, who the data subject is. Could be, felon, or person having been arrested, judge, police, etc., acting in certain capacities. And then type of information, the nature of the information. And I hope I'll get to this point in a moment because it's on the top of my head. And then this thing that had to be invented so everything else is people who are in database technologies and access and so forth. That's not, it's not terribly surprising, access control in terms of blah, blah. So to capture this flow, you need to characterize these different parameters. And then the fifth parameter is something that had to be invented called the transmission principle. So think of it as the constraints or the conditions under which the information flows. So if we say, probably one of the most important one is with consent of the data subject, but that's definitely not the only transmission principle. But therefore, if you want to describe an information flow, or if you want to express a rule of information flow, then you need to specify these 5 parameters. When I had presented this work to some colleagues in computer science, I didn't really realize it, but when I was describing it to them, they were like, wow, we think we can formalize this. And once that moment happened, it became a theory that could hop over into computational systems of various kinds. And there's some research going on. I mean, it's still tough. There are all sorts of tough questions. Now, this theory then flew in the face of a number of pre-existing theories. So, for example, there are a lot of theories that want to say, oh, well, the world of information is divided into sensitive information and not sensitive, or public information. And we don't have to worry about the public information. We only have to worry about the sensitive information. Now, what's really interesting, so contextual integrity says no. There's no such thing there's no information where there isn't at least some set of rules that constrain the flow. It is true that there's some types of information, I say types of information, that are more constrained in terms of who can get it, the conditions under which you can get it, and so forth. Now, recently, I've been reading up and learning as much as I can about things like permission. So if you're an app developer and you're building an app that has to work on the Android OS, then you know that and again, I'm talking as someone who's learning from my colleagues, that there's 3 levels of permissions. One is about the resources that Google or Android decides whether you can get the camera and whatever it is. Then there's the sensitive information, and then there's the dangerous information. And the dangerous information requires that you pop up and get the user's permission. The sensitive information, you need to get the permission sort of at installation time, and then the resources is just between the app developer. So what's going on here is that we're taking this entire universe of information types and we're collapsing it into 3 categories, and then it's like, have at it. These are the policies. That is antithetical, may I say, to contextual integrity.
So it's almost like so I guess the answer to the question is we actually need systems that map onto this ontology. I mean, actually, what you've described is already kind of a protocol. I mean, it is like a protocol. Like there's certain actors that have certain parameters and certain computations that are allowed and not allowed.
Yes.
But it sounds like what you're describing is that basically the tools that we're given are sort of built under the assumption of an old definition of privacy, and so maybe we shouldn't be surprised that we're all sort of building tools and operating underneath an older definition. That's fascinating. So given the definition of what is a good flow and a bad flow, and like these kinds of low level systems that we want to see built, sort of what can you say to the big groups or types of audience members on how they can get involved in helping these kinds of systems to come to fruition? Like is it only the 10 people in the world that like write operating systems or lead operating systems projects or whatever who can play a part, or how should we all be kind of as technicians, as entrepreneurs, as funders, teachers, kind of participate in leading towards this kind of infrastructure?
Well, I want to think that some of the things that I've been yelling for 10, maybe 20 years even, have moved the needle a little bit, and I think we need to understand why we're moving the needle and then what's to put in their place. So for example, finally, people who actually have a say in things understand that the regime of notice and choice, or privacy policy and consent, is really not meaningfully doing anything. And but they don't understand why. They may understand it, but I haven't seen much insight. So usually the story you hear is, oh, people can't understand privacy policies, so they don't know what they're consenting to. We know that there's tons of evidence of that. The world has become so complex and the data flows are just impossible to describe. We never, this falls flat. But what they fail to notice is that the reason this notice and choice mechanism is problematic for privacy is that what you're saying is you're just passing the buck. You're saying, blah, 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 blah. User, you need to make a decision. There's no thought that's given as to, is this data flow a good thing for the person, the user? Is it a good thing for society? That's the kind of thinking that I want us to do. So if you're building a system and the regulation doesn't demand that you start saying to yourself, why should we do this or that, or why should this be an acceptable or an appropriate flow that we would support, that this system would support? We knee-jerk, it's just much easier to follow this procedural approach. Oh, let's just ask the user. But the user is in no position to understand the ramification either for him or herself or for society, because a lot of decisions that an individual might make actually has ramifications for society, and it's not fair to push it up.
Classic collective action problem, yeah.
Exactly. And so what we need a lot of thinking about productive data flows. And I feel like if we're talking about supporting research, philosophical research, which is very hard for anybody to support because whatever, that's the kind of thinking we want. And we don't want people like me, a privacy theorist, to be talking about what the data flows should be in education. You want people in education who understand teaching and so forth. That's where the thinking has to go on. The EFFs and the CDTs and so forth, they're great advocacy organizations, but if you want to know or understand how there's a lot of work that needs to be done within these different social domains to understand. And then, I'll just say one thing. No, I just want to say, because I didn't really directly answer the question that you asked me, which was, let's say you're building a system. You may also not have the insight to say, oh, I know how the data should flow, but you want to build expressive enough, it needs to be expressive enough that you can at least identify these parameters, and then, used in different domains, you are able to fix the values for the parameters. If you don't build that into your system from the ground up, then you've already handicapped your system. Okay.
No, that's amazing. That's such great advice. And actually, tying into your analogy from earlier about Benjamin Franklin, who said that the mail service has to have a certain kind of information flow. He didn't do that necessarily altruistically. He did that because he wanted the efficiency and wanted the I guess in his case, he wanted the American people to be successful, right? And I think maybe what I hope is that there could be some creative thought that justifies such a system to exist, even if, as you said, regulation hasn't yet stipulated yet, because we want to have more competitive, more powerful, more influential systems that do a better job. So actually, okay, so in that case, let me pivot. I know we're getting short on time, so I'll let you inform that. But of all the different information flows you could be working on, you're working on obfuscation, which is such a fascinating thing, and I love playing with ad nauseam. It's such a fascinating idea. Yeah, tell us about this. Of all the information flow patterns that you could be working on, why have you chosen obfuscation? How does that work?
I mean, that's really a little disconnected. It doesn't immediately follow from contextual integrity, but it's one of these. It was one of these moments of rebellion, which is to say, we're in this environment where the power imbalances are massive, and I had particularly been incensed about surveillance of web search, because it seemed to me that a lot of people are using web search tools instead of doing things like going to the libraries, and we've had an amazing tradition of privacy protection in libraries, intellectual freedom of speech, and so forth. And now we have this web search environment where every single web search you issue is not only saved, but then it enters into your profile of interests and so forth. And I think I was really naive at the time, and I thought, well, you just go to the search companies and you say, hey, stop storing my searches or something. You go to the regulators and you say, isn't it outrageous that, and of course, absolutely nobody's listening. I don't know whether they don't care or they're in, this kind of collusion, who knows. So it was really a challenge to say, if you're like a tiny little speck within this huge system that's being provided by someone whose interests are directly in opposition to you, what can you do about it? And it came to me that the only thing you can do in these kinds of environments of information capture is obfuscate. You can't hide. You just have to, and then it turns out that, as you know from, perhaps you've seen the book, but this is such a common practice. Animals do it, insects do it. I mean, we didn't invent it. It just happens. And so I don't think obfuscation is where we ultimately want to be, but it's a tool of protest to be able to say, we can do this. We can mess up your data stores. It's not great to have to do it. But until we come to the table and we know what the purpose is and we can agree on the values that this data is going to serve, that's all we have. And so we've done ad nauseam and track me not. There are other systems. This is something that a single hacker with determination, and I mean, recently I heard a talk about voice profiling, where there are mechanisms now that when you hear someone's voice, of course, male, female, race, racial origin, maybe even sexual orientation, who knows what, because we have now all these voice assistants sitting in our homes. I mean, a lot of people buy these things. I don't know why, but they do. They're inviting these companies right into their homes. So now we have millions of hours of voice, and we can train machine learning on voice, all the spoken word that we have, do a lot of profiling and classifying people in one way or another. So
So just for the benefit of audience members that might be newer or younger, can you explain just quickly how ad nauseam works so that they can sort of get the essence of obfuscation and what it's about?
Yes. So the different obfuscatory tools work in slightly different ways. The way ad nauseam works, we have this like little entryway into the behavioral advertising scheme, where some of the profiling that the ad networks do, and it's not only this, is what ads you click. So when you click an ad, that's tremendous indication of what your interests are, and it's a way actually for them to measure whether the ads are well targeted. And so all ad nauseam does, and it's built on top of an ad blocker, an open source ad blocker, and all of our tools are free and they're open source, and we love people to help us and give us advice and find bugs. But all it does is it goes onto a page and it identifies all the ads on a page and it clicks them, messing with your profile.
Fascinating. Whenever I've explained it to someone, there's always this knee-jerk reaction, like clicks them. What? You mean clicks all of them? Like, wouldn't that just sort of increase it? Like, maybe you can explain a little bit about what happens to that information when ad nauseam does this?
Well, I mean, I don't really know. That's the whole problem. No. So what happens? There are different ways you can use ad nauseam. Some people hate ads, and so they utilize the feature of blocking ads. I can say that I have ad nauseam and I have Track Me Not also installed on all of my computers. I find my pages load so much faster. When I'm using a machine that doesn't have that, it drives me nuts. So what it does, if you want, it blocks all the ads, just like a regular ad blocker, but it clicks all the ads. And then we have this, we have a visualization which then captures the ads. And if you want to see all the ads that you didn't actually have on your page, to give you an idea of how the internet understands you, is it showing you shoes? Is it showing you travel? Is it, what is it showing you? We have this thing called an ad vault.
Wow, I have not experienced this yet. You mean like I can see like my own personal trends, like about like sort of what the internet thinks about me over a period of time, like my own personal like dashboard page almost?
Yes, that's what it is. Yeah, it's cool.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally gonna go try that. That sounds really, really cool. I had not stumbled upon that feature yet. That's really, really neat. Have you had what do you usually see when you look inside these kind of boards?
No, I'm not gonna tell you.
Okay, all right. You can keep the surprise. I guess it is, and it's different for every person, right? So I guess that's part of it.
I'm kidding, because maybe it'll tell you what I've been doing on the web recently.
Oh, right, of course. No,
but so even with ad nauseam, the work is just nonstop because Firefox. By the way, we were banned on the Chrome store, but there has been a workaround, and so you actually can install. But I think that's a good reason always to use Firefox, because why would you use Chrome or Safari if you could use Firefox? And Firefox has I don't know, labeled us as one of the most fabulous add-ons, but we're trying to do more. We're trying to make it work on Facebook. Right now it works on just regularly on the web. We've actually recently just had an incredible set of tests where we can prove that ad nauseam actually the clicks are actually counted in the big scheme. We're trying to make it work on Facebook. We have limited. There are reasons. One of the reasons that it doesn't work so well on Facebook is the sponsored stories part of the page is so obfuscated that it's pretty impossible for an ad blocker to identify that as an ad. You can only do the banner ads. We can only identify the banner ads, and that in itself is that companies use obfuscation too.
Huh. So it sounds like there's a lot of obfuscation going on all over the place. Goodness, definitely the tool of choice.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending time. Thank you for talking to the audience today, and thanks for all the great work that you've done in privacy. Obviously, we're all standing on your shoulders in many ways, and best of luck in your work. And any parting words or last things you would share with kind of the community watching?
Well, I know a little bit about the community, your community and the community who are attending this conference. And all I can say is that I'm just thrilled that there's any interest in this stuff, because, this is the generation that's going to create and shape the future. And if with your interest and with your expertise and power and so forth, I feel like we're maybe not in a great place, but you're taking us to a better place. So thank you very much.
Man, that's awesome. I think we'll finish with that. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.